Brilliant. So, welcome to the latest DiBella's Digest with Lou DiBella. And Lou, as we always start, how's your week been?
Well, my week's been. How's my week been? I mean, this is certainly a time of tribulation and trial in America. So, my week's been interesting. I think it's interesting times, and actually, I think we're at a very important historical moment in the United States, and maybe an important historical moment in the world, but certainly in the United States. So it's certainly not dull as much as I can't work, and I'm living in this strange life of Groundhog's Day. There has been a lot going on, and a lot to think about, a lot to talk about. After we touched on everything last week, I don't want to go over the same ground, but certainly interesting times. And then last night, boxing came back on ESPN. It was sort of what we anticipated. It wasn't the greatest show on earth. It was not big fights. It wasn't particularly competitive fights. But you know what? It felt good, man. It felt good. It felt like seeing an old friend for the first time in a number of months. Or it felt like a good meal of comfort food when you're not in a great mood. You know what I mean? It still was good to see boxing back. It felt good to watch any boxing at all. So there's a show Thursday night. ESPN's coming back now. Top Rank's going a few times a week. These aren't big star sort of turns. These aren't huge fights or particularly meaningful fights in a world title sense, but the matchups will improve. I think this show Thursday night will be better than last night, and I'm looking forward. Look, I'm a boxing guy, so if you're going to put boxing on television when I have nothing else to watch, I'm certainly going to watch it, and I'm not going to criticize anybody for getting back on the horse and trying to ride.
We'd seen WWE, we'd seen UFC, both without crowds. How do you think boxing lent itself to that environment?
It doesn't lend itself so great to that environment. It just doesn't. But we discussed, Danny, we've been talking about that from the beginning. I don't think, to be honest with you, I don't think WWE lends itself so well. But there's such a scripted and cartoon kind of thing, they can make up for it. You know what I mean? So I think that maybe because they're sports entertainment, it's easier for them. And as we always discussed, the nature of MMA in a cage is more suited. You don't notice the lack of everything else so much. But you know what? I think that people who are hungry for boxing are still going to watch. Do I think that boxing in an empty room with second-tier fights are going to build a fan base? No. But I think it's going to feed the fan base we already have that's certainly hungry. So, better that it's back to some degree than it's not back at all.
What do you make of Shakur Stevenson likely to now stay up at 130 and relinquish his featherweight championship, which seems to be going to happen soon?
I mean, it doesn't matter much in my view. I mean, I think he's extremely talented boxer. He's not a big power puncher, but to the extent he's gonna stop overmatched opponents, it's gonna be late. But he's not gonna lose to a lot of people. I mean, he's a very, very skilled boxer. And interestingly, people talk about, like, I got to be honest with you, all the superlatives last night and the comparisons to Mayweather and all the other shit, stop. If I have any criticism of last night is I had to listen to people talk too much, and then too much of it was hyperbole, But he is a very good fighter, and actually, he reminds me, his skill set and the way he fights in the ring actually reminds me the most of his manager, and who was also the commentator last night, Andre Ward. And I consider Andre Ward to be an all-time great fighter. So obviously, I'm giving a pretty good compliment to Shakur Stevenson. But Andre always took criticism because he never blasted people out or whatever. But he was brilliant. I think Shakur Stevenson has the skill set and the natural God-given ability to be a special fighter. I don't know that he has the explosiveness or the passion or the power to be a superstar, but he's certainly going to be a guy that's going to win a world title, whether it be at 30 or 26 or 35 eventually. I mean, this is a kid that will win, in my mind, a few world championships and will have a very, very good career. How good, time will tell. But he's not exactly stylistically my favorite kind of fighter, but I have the utmost respect for him and his ability. I mean, for his ability and his skill set. And I think he's going to be formidable at 130. I don't think he's ready yet for the top of 130. I think he needs a little bit more seasoning, but you don't have to rush with a kid like that.
You mentioned Andre Ward there, and he made some contentious comments on social media, I think it was recently, where he was talking about black fighters generally and saying that fans are less interested when they're not playing the villain. And
but I you know what? I think he's 100% right. And I love Andre. You know what? I really am a fan of Andre Ward as a human being. Like, I really like the guy. And I find him a very compelling person to have a conversation with. It's interesting, but I actually thought about calling him because I wanted to have a conversation about that, because I agree with him, by the way. However, I think a lot of that deals with some of the negativity among like hip hop culture and rap culture, where there is a little bit of a glorification of the gangster, and I think Floyd. I don't think Floyd changed himself from being Pretty Boy Floyd to Money Mayweather because of pressure from the white community. I don't think he did it for pressure at all. I think he did it with an understanding that that image would be easier to sell. And frankly, who was he primarily selling it to? He was selling it to boxing fans in general, but I also do think he was selling it to the hip hop community, to the urban market. Do you know what I mean? So I agree with Andre's premise, but I don't necessarily agree with him that is a reflection necessarily of racism. That part of it. I'd like to hear his point of view more. I'd like to talk to him about it, actually. But I think that some of the stuff he's talking, and by the way, I don't disagree with him. I mean, Out of Control, Mike Tyson may have been the most popular Mike Tyson. But I don't think Mike Tyson was out of control for the white community. And by the way, do I think black fighters have to deal with racism? I think every black person has to deal with racism. I think racism has been endemic all over the world in every society, pretty much. So, I'm very empathetic. But I think some of that in terms of being the fine, upstanding role model African American fighter has gotten less attention than the out of control Mike Tyson, than Money Mayweather, than the guys that have tried to appeal to the more urban kind of hip hop kind of sensibility. I don't necessarily think that is particularly a result of pressure from the white community. I don't necessarily agree with that. But by the way, I'd be open. I'd like to talk to Andre about it. Next time I see him, I'm going to bring it up because I'm curious. Because he's a very bright, well-spoken guy and very thoughtful guy, and I'm curious to hear more about what he has to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, when I first heard the comments, I wasn't sure if I entirely agreed with them, just because of guys like Sugar Ray Leonard and people like that who have been incredibly popular. But then he brought up the example of Danny Jacobs and questioned why someone who's been through what Jacobs has been through wasn't more popular.
Well, yeah, he's right about that. But he's right about that. But if you talk to, I have had that conversation with members of the African American boxing community in New York, and I've never really particularly understood it. But they just said basically he doesn't have, sort of the street cred or the appeal to. He's not the kind of guy that Hot 97 is looking to come on and talk about controversial topics or be edgy or whatever. He doesn't have, he's a guy that's defeated cancer and a fine, upstanding kind of guy, but he's not embraced. To some extent, the African American community also has to look at itself and ask the question, why is the Danny Jacobs less attractive than maybe somebody else? But that doesn't get into the whole concept of racism. That just gets into what, as people and as a society and as segments of society, we value. You know what I mean? We the bad boy. Why do so many beautiful women like shitty fucking asshole guys? Like why do scumbags attract and abusers attract so many women that appear to be of quality? Well, There's always. I mean, why are there so many women attracted to the bad boy? I don't know. I don't know. But that's not an issue of racism, you know.
And news broke earlier today. Well, I say news, I think that's the debate whether it is real news or not, that AJ and Tyson Fury have apparently agreed a 2-fight deal for sometime in 2021 to face each other twice, although that appears to be predicated upon agreeing various details, Fury getting past Wilder and possibly getting
Danny, talk to someone else about this one, okay? He has a contract for his next fight. Neither one of them, both of them have contracts for their next fight. Both of them there are mandatories. Would anyone have foreseen a pandemic? Would anyone have foreseen the complete uncertainty in the entire world right now? So we're going to sit here and we're going to start talking about a 2-fight agreement predicated on a bunch of ifs, whats, etc. for a year or two from now. I'm not going there. I'm not interested.
Fair enough. Just before we let you go, what do you think people can expect from boxing in the next few weeks, months, as it continues to roll out from the pandemic? What will change from where we are with the top-ranked shows right now?
I think the top-ranked shows will get marginally better, and I think you'll see better. You know, they'll have more time. And this first one, they had an awful lot of hoops to jump through. It's a new world, and it's hard to adjust to that new world. I think you'll see PBC coming back at some point. I think you'll see Eddie and DAZN and, you know, coming back at some point. I don't think it's going to be back to any semblance of normal. And I've been consistent in saying this. I think you'll see some bigger fights happen in the fall, because they're going to have to figure out how to allow some bigger fights to happen, even with diminished revenue. I think you'll see fighters get more used to the idea of adjusting to a new economic reality, and also some promoters understanding that they can only negotiate so far when they have firm contracts. So I think there's going to be, you know, it's going to be a process, Danny, and I've said that all along. It's going to be a process, and we're not going to get back to normal until coronavirus has disappeared as a pandemic, which it's not happening right now. And we're not getting back to some kind of normal until there's a vaccine that's readily available and distributed. And you know, so normal, the new normal, I think we're going to be adjusting over time to a new normal. And I think for boxing fans and everyone else, the new normal is going to get more tolerable over time.
Great. Well, always a pleasure, always an education as well. And we'll see you again, hopefully next week.
You'll see me next week. I'm not going anywhere, Danny. I got nothing. Right now, I ain't promoting boxing shows in New York in the near future, so I got not much to do, my friend. And this little chat every Wednesday has become part of my my routine. So I look forward to talking to you next Wednesday.
Brilliant. Take care, Lou. See you soon.
Take care, Dan. Take care. Bye bye.